Folks, thank you for tuning in to Strategies for Living. David Sunfellow's coming up, The Purpose of Life. We're going to talk as revealed by near-death experiences from around the world. This should be fun and informative. We're doing our best to make radio healthy again here on Strategies for Living, and we're brought to you by Cypress Grove Behavioral Health Systems, by Gilsole and Associates, attorneys at law, by Jerry Anderson, State Farm Insurance, by Learning RX, by Cannabis with Love, new location 3772 Uri Drive in Shreveport, and by The Joint Chiropractic, Shreveport, Bossier City. Right back to meet David Sunfellow. Stay with us.
I can see clearly now, the rain is gone.
Welcome in. Welcome into Strategies for Living here on 101.7 FM, 710 Keel. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan with Reuben Wright. And let's welcome to the program now the founder and president of New Heaven, New Earth, NHNE. It's a small internet-based nonprofit that's located in Sedona, Arizona. NHNE first emerged online back in October 1994, was one of the first spiritually oriented organizations to emerge on the internet. Also one of the first organizations to make a search for the truth rather than promoting specific religious or philosophical agendas. Its primary goal, the mission statement of NHNE, is the mission is to answer humankind's oldest, most perplexing questions. Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we headed? What is the origin and purpose of life? Whoa! When he's not doing this work, David works as a professional photographer. He's also a videographer and website designer, the father of three daughters, and one son, and has lived in Sedona the past 35 years. So it's a pleasure to welcome, as life strategist, David Sunfellow. Mr. Sunfellow, welcome.
Hey, David, thank you. Appreciate being on your show.
Oh, man, I just appreciate you answering the phone today and saying, yeah, I'm not doing anything at 5 o'clock. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked out, too.
How long have you been doing this, David? How did this get started?
I've been doing it basically all my adult life. The near-death experience part of this began probably in about 1974, 75. I was in Virginia Beach.
Yeah.
And I had a chance to listen to a talk given by a fellow Dr. George Ritchie.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it turns out that he was sharing his near-death experience.
Yeah.
And those of your listeners who are familiar with the work of Raymond Moody, who basically launched the modern near-death experience movement, it traces back to George Ritchie, who was a colleague of his.
Right.
George Ritchie told him his near-death experience, and that launched Raymond Moody on his research and compiling his first book, Life After Life.
And Dr. Moody's been a life strategist here on Strategies for Living.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I'm in good company there.
Yeah.
So I had a chance to hear Dr. Ritchie tell his story, and at that time in my life, I'd never heard anything about near-death experiences. Most of my research and the information I had pertained to classical mystical experiences, enlightenment experiences. And here is a man who died, and when he died, passed over to the other side, met Jesus, and was taken on a tour of heaven and hell and all these various realms, and then came back with specific lessons and advice about how to live our lives in this world.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure really what to do with that at the time because it was so different and unique. And again, this was around or a little bit before the time that before Raymond actually published his first book. So near-death experiences, the term which he coined, was not in the culture at the time.
In vogue, yeah.
Yeah, so that started it, and I began keeping an eye on near-death experiences as they emerged over time. And then I'm going to skip forward to an event that took place when I was living in North Carolina. I was at a Quaker meeting, and the Quaker meetings typically have an hour of silent prayer and meditation.
Right.
And that's followed by a meeting at the end, a work meeting. And the people will often during that time will share what they're doing around the world. And the Quakers are very active in various kinds of social activism.
Right.
And as I listened to each person go around the circle, describe what they were doing, they were helping people in various countries dealing with hunger issues or environmental issues or whatever it was. And every person that spoke, I thought, wow, this is such a great thing they're doing. I'd like to be a part of that. And I'd like to be a part of the next one. I'd like to be a part of the next one. And then, about 5 or 6 people into it, it occurred to me, where are all these problems coming from? What is the source of all these difficulties that humankind is facing, and what can we do to solve them all rather than, putting them out one fire at a time and then new fires pop up because we haven't identified the cause.
Right.
So now fast forward a few more years, and that led to founding New Heaven, New Earth, my nonprofit. And so we've been online for the past 25 years looking at all kinds of things, trying to identify the core reasons for life, where we came from, why we're here, where we're headed. And we've done all kinds of research over the years. And then about 10 and a half years ago, the lights went off in my head that near-death experiences were becoming a global phenomenon, where people all over the world, from all cultures, all religions, were basically having and reporting the same kind of experience. And so at that point, I basically took all the resources we had and aimed them directly at let's figure out what this near-death experience thing is all about. So that's a bit of a background.
And the book that you've come out with, it's called The Purpose of Life. We'll talk about how to get the book, but it's a collection of great stories and quotes. And you've been doing this, you've been collecting this, 40-plus years of studying
right.
NDEs, even before they were named NDEs.
That's right. So the book specifically is a collection of the best stories and quotes I've come across in that 40-year-plus time frame. And let me say the last 10 and a half years has been spent not just collecting stories, reading stories, watching videos, listening to audio accounts, but actually building networks and gathering near-death experiencers together. So I've met and interacted with hundreds and hundreds of experiencers themselves, and been gathering the stories from that resource also. So it's been a very hands-on attempt. And so the book is basically the best of the best stories and quotes I've come across that illustrate the power, the clarity, the life-changing transformational abilities of these experiences. And one thing that other researchers have learned, we know from the research and from talking to people that have had these experiences that it completely changes their lives. What we also have learned is that it can change the lives of other people in the same way.
Yes.
By being exposed to these stories and reading them and learning about them, because it triggers soul knowings in all of us, kind of memories of where we're from and why we're actually here.
Yes.
So it's a transformational experience just to become aware of these stories and begin to study them and search for ways to apply them in our everyday life.
I guess the thing that really makes one take notice, David, is how across cultures, across time, across the world, how remarkably consistent, how remarkably inspirational, how remarkably instructive these stories are.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's why I decided to focus on near-death experiences versus all the other kinds of spiritual experiences people have, from mystical experiences to dreams, shamanic experience, hallucinogenic experiences, hypnotic regressions, channeling sessions. There's all kinds of ways that people have experiences with the divine. But what I've seen in the research that I've done is that when you take all these different experiences as a whole and look at them, There's no other experience that I'm aware of that's more consistently clear than near-death experiences. And in addition, it has the component of completely changing lives, and often that means miraculous healings. There are many people that are in various kinds of, have died out of illness or something else. They pass over to the other side. They come back and they're healed from whatever their illness was that may have sparked the near-death experience to begin with. So there's a lot of juice in these experiences, power in terms of healing power, and also in terms of transforming lives, and then clarity. So that's why I zero in on this experience versus all the other ones I've been researching over the years as the one that looks like we can learn the most and answer the big questions the clearest by focusing on near-death experiences and what they can teach us.
I hope that you will be willing, as we move on tonight, to share. This may be an unfair thing because you've collected these, and I suspect that these stories that made it to the book are somewhat like your children. So I may have to apologize to ask you, okay, pick your favorite child.
No, I'm glad to.
But I hope that you will share some of these with us this evening as we move through this, because I think, again, they do have the capacity to alter us, to change us. I remember interviewing Dr. Eben Alexander a few years ago, and I know from looking around some of your websites that you have his picture up. And I had the opportunity to interview him right when the first book came out, and then I interviewed him again. He published a subsequent book about a year and a half ago. Don't hold me to the time exactly, but somewhere around in there. And it was striking to me to think back and remember and listen to the change. The positive change in his, just the peacefulness about him, the surety about him. Yeah. Researcher Kenneth Ring, you quote him. He's an NDE researcher, and if I could, you have this quote in the book, but I want to share it as we move into our first break. He says, "The true promise of the NDE is not so much what it suggests about an afterlife, as inspiring and as comforting as those glimpses are, but what it says about how to live now, to learn from NDEers how compassion, how to live better with greater self-awareness, self-compassion, and concern for others." Wow.
Amen.
That's pretty strong. David Sunfellow, the author of The Purpose of Life, as revealed by near-death experiences from around the world. When we come back, David's going to share some stories with us that he's collected through the years and stand out for him, and we will learn much more. Buckle your seatbelt. David Sunfellow this evening here on Strategies. Be right back.
For an aeroplane, ain't got time to take a fast train. Lonely days are gone, I'm a-going home.
Welcome back into Strategies for Living here on 101.7 FM, 710 KEO. Marriage and family therapist David McMillan with David Sunfellow today. He is the author of The Purpose of Life, as revealed by near-death experiences from around the world. You can, of course, I got it on Amazon. I told the story. I don't know if you heard it, David. I guess somebody wanted us to have this conversation because maybe Amazon hears all. It popped up. It popped up, and of course, as I read what it was, I was hooked. You get Amazon Prime, you get it in your hands in a day or so. And that led to this phone call today. So thank you for being here.
Glad to be.
So, of course, you can get it at Amazon or wherever you buy books. It's called The Purpose of Life. So, got a story or two you can share with us, my friend?
Yeah, sure. Let me introduce this by saying that one thing that's really interesting about near-death experiences, I had my niece once ask me, I've studied all these things around the world. What was it about near-death experiences that was different? What did I learn that was different from what you can learn from all these other kinds of experiences?
Yeah.
And the answer that came to my mind was how to put the pieces together. We have pieces of the big puzzle of life laying all over the world. Well, how do you put them all together? Near-death experiences helped me do that. And the second thing they helped me do was to know how to put them together in a special way, like some parts were more important than others.
Yeah.
And so there's several key insights that you learn from near-death experiences if you study them deeply. And one of them, which is extremely striking, is this idea that the little things in life are the big things. And I'm going to illustrate that with a couple stories. And it's a very practical strategy for living a healthy life, to try to cultivate an attitude of awareness for the little things that we do in our lives end up being the big things on the other side. When one of the core features of a near-death experience that about 22, 23% of the people that cross over have is called a life review.
Yeah.
And during this life review process, they see their life played out before them. And what's striking in many near-death experiences are these little things that they've forgotten about jump out as these epic events in their life. So here's one story that illustrates this from the book, Chapter 6. During my life review, my angel showed me a scene I'd forgotten. I saw myself at 17 when I'd worked at a convalescent hospital after school. I'd grown fond of toothless old woman who was no longer able to speak clearly and who never had visitors. She liked to suck on graham crackers before going to bed, but no one wanted to serve her because when she had finished, she would drool as she kissed the entire length of the arm of the person feeding her. While others avoided her, I willingly fed her the cookies she adored, seeing how happy this made her feel. When that scene was replayed for me, I felt as if every loving spirit in God's kingdom was thanking me in unison. I was amazed that such an act could have meant so much to God and to me, and I felt humbled and very honored.
Wow. Jeez. Now, the interesting thing that you've done in this book, too, is every one of the stories, some of them are a little longer than that. That one is called Graham Crackers and Milk, Diane Morrissey. But each one of them, at the end of the story, there are some companion videos that go along, and you reference them in the book. And you can learn more about, like in this case, Diane Morrissey, at thepurposeoflife-nde.com/contents. And yeah.
And that's really important. The idea behind the book was to present the stories and actionable information so people would have almost an NDE Bible of sorts that they could use, that had the best of the best stories that focused, again, on practical application, but didn't spend much time dealing with, well, who was this person? What happened to them?
Right.
Have they written any books?
Right.
How can I learn more?
Right.
And so the book is actually a two-part proposition. Part one is the book itself with all the stories.
Right.
Part two is the book's companion website, which then has all the background information on the stories, the books they published and written, what their experience was like, how they died, how they came back, that kind of thing. So that, and a lot of it, there's 30 of the stories in this book comes from videos that people of them describing their experience. So you can watch those videos on the website, which I encourage all readers to do, because reading the story is one thing, watching and listening to the person tell their story is something else.
That's incredibly rich, David. That is, wow. The fact that we can do that today in and of itself kind of gives me goosebumps to think about it, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
I thought when you started to describe that you were going to maybe tell us about God's glasses.
We could do that. I have another story in mind that I'd like to share next, though, if you don't mind. We can do God's glasses, too.
Absolutely.
So this first one focused on our interactions with other human beings.
Right.
But the little things, paying attention to the little things, also pertain to our environment and to nature. So this next story focuses on that. Our relationship with the rest of nature, not just human beings.
Right.
This next story comes from Chapter 8, Watering a Tree. It's from a gentleman named Muhammad Z. This is the story. I was asked to go and bring some water in a bucket from a nearby river. I went to fill up the bucket, but on my way back, I felt the bucket was too heavy for me. So I decided to empty some of the water to make the bucket lighter. Instead of emptying the water right there, I noticed a tree that was alone by itself in a dry patch of land. I took the effort to go out of my way to that tree and emptied some of the water at the tree base. I even waited there a few seconds to make sure the water was soaked in the soil and was absorbed. In my life review, I received such applause and joy for this simple act that it is unbelievable. It was like all the spirits in the universe were filled with joy from this simple act and were telling me, we are proud of you. That simple act seemed to be one of the best things I'd ever done in my life. That was strange to me because I didn't think this little act was a big deal, and I thought I had done much more important and bigger things. However, it was shown to me that what I had done was extremely valuable because I had done it purely from the heart with absolutely no expectation for my own gain.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know if you remember this or know this, but the fact that the gentleman is named Muhammad Z, is he from a different, maybe not Christian? Was he maybe from the Muslim religion, or do you
That's
remember?
my assumption. That's one of the stories that's on Jeffrey Long's website.
So, again, it's an example of these NDEs cutting across everything. But one of the universal truths is that God exists and God loves everybody unconditionally.
That's a really big, really important, huge, massive theme in NDEs.
Yeah. I think also what came out is God's got a sense of humor.
That's another thing. I mentioned a list of various things you can discern from these experiences if you look at them carefully enough. And humor is another one that caught me by surprise.
Yeah.
And a lot of especially the deeper near-death experiences, meaning the longer ones where people have gone and had more dramatic, full-blown experiences, there's elements of humor that are wrapped in these experiences that are really unexpectedly delightful.
Yeah.
I have a couple of those here I could share with you if you'd like me to.
Yes, please.
Okay. This is from Chapter 14. It's called The Funniest Thought in the World. It's from John K. I became aware the God I was experiencing was not just a life force or some impersonal consciousness, but God had a personality, an integrity like the Father I had never known. God had a sense of humor. He and I both laughed at the thought of me questioning his existence. It seemed to me to be absolutely the funniest thought in the world, and we laughed at the thought of it. I realized that I was the shadow and he was the reality. The very idea that I would question his existence was a source of laughter for me and God. I was sobbing, overcome by the sheer amount of love that swept through me and over me, and laughing at the same time.
I have a friend. He's in the mental health field, and he will make no secret about the fact that he's atheist. But I have had several conversations with him over the course of the time that I've known him because of the way he acts. And I laughingly say to him, you're one of the most Christian atheists I know. And he laughs and says, that another person or, the other people have said similar things to him. But when you were sharing the story This guy that I'm talking about has a wonderful sense of humor, among others. He's a very, very bright guy, very smart guy, but he's got a great sense of humor. And I thought of him and God laughing,
Right.
as you were
Right.
telling that story, because that's another thing. It's like God is not small. Our God is not small at all. So maybe our quote unquote small ideas, and maybe that God doesn't exist, or that God is a certain way, this way or that way, maybe those are quote unquote small ideas. Maybe we need to figure out how to get bigger ideas about God. And maybe that's one of the things that NDEs are helping us do, huh?
I think so. Definitely.
Uh,
While you're telling that story about your friend, I have another one that leapt to mind that your readers might find interesting.
Go for it.
It's from chapter 19, and the chapter is titled, Why Am I So Depressed? This is actually not a near-death experience. It's what's called a near-death-like experience.
Right.
Anyway, this is the story. She was hearing a voice. I asked the voice, "Are you God?" "Yes," the voice answered. The voice sounded masculine, but it was as if a waterfall or mountain could talk, if that makes sense. It sounded like no human voice I'd ever heard before. I had to ask this: does Jesus exist? The answer I got was, Jesus is God. I realized that must be who I was talking to, the Spirit of Jesus. I asked again to confirm. Jesus is God? I asked. Yes. This is going to sound silly, but I let it slip that I hated Christianity. And this voice of God laughed. God has a great sense of humor. Then I realized I didn't hate Christianity and definitely did not hate Jesus. I just did not like some of his followers. I asked this question: why am I so depressed all the time? And the answer I got was, you forgot that I love you. As I spoke with God, his love for me, this intense love that I can't explain, was making me feel powerful. I think for a little while, God let me see through his eyes. I suddenly felt love for everyone.
Wow. The Purpose of Life. David Sunfellow, our life strategist. This book, The Purpose of Life, is revealed by near-death experiences around the world. We've got more. Don't go away. More David Sunfellow here on Strategies. Welcome back in to Strategies for Living here on 101.7 FM, 710 Keel. Marriage and family therapist David McMillan, Reuben Wright with David Sunfellow. He is the author of a wonderful book. You gotta know about this book, folks. It's called The Purpose of Life, as revealed by near-death experiences from around the world. You can find it where you buy books. You can certainly get it at Amazon.com. And there's just so many, David, truths that come up. But I got to ask you, before you get back to another story or two, what's been the biggest surprise? You've been doing this a long time, over a lot of years. What's been the biggest surprise for you, David Sunfellow, that has emerged?
Well, I would say, as I said before, one of the big things was the emphasis that near-death experiences place on the little things in life, paying attention to the little things.
Yeah.
I knew that before, but it was kind of a vague thought in my mind. After reading so many of these stories and people illustrating these little things, often things that they had forgotten about and couldn't remember consciously, and they were reminded of when they watched their life review, that was one thing that really made an impact on me. Wow, the little things. So, in other words, when I get up in the morning,
especially the heartfelt, they can be small, but the heartfelt acts, those acts ripple.
Right, exactly. So when I get up in the morning, I try to keep that in mind all day long with all the people I interact with, the animals I interact with, the way I walk on the earth, on the grass. Try to keep in mind that everything I'm interacting with, I'm in relationship with, and I'm impacting in some way, and they're impacting me. And try to be a force, a consciously aware force in the world for doing good, being good, and being aware of my impact on other people and things. So that was really huge. Another thing that really jumped out at me was the humor thing, which we've already talked about.
Yeah.
I think humor is one of those things that we're often looking for things that will lift us into higher states of consciousness, and humor seems to be one of those things that will do that. If we can lighten up and try to see the comical side of life, including our own dramas, our own suffering, our own circumstances, that can be a way tangibly that we can lift ourselves, we can vibrate in a higher way. And so I was surprised to see how much humor was emphasized in these experiences.
Well, we talk about, you're talking about lighten up, and we talk about wanting enlightenment. I mean, there's obviously a relationship there.
Directly, yes, I agree. So another thing that for me has been really helpful is one huge misconception that near-death experiencers have, people in general have, or on the spiritual path, is thinking that if they have a spiritual experience, it will transform the human side of them. And it 100% does not do that. We still have to work on correcting and raising the areas of our life that are not, as good as they can be.
Right.
So a lot of people will have these experiences, and they'll come back thinking, because I had an experience of God, because I was healed, because I have various paranormal abilities now that I didn't have before, I'm pretty much done, and I'm ready and willing to share my great wisdom with the world. Where if they follow that path without dealing with the human side of themselves, they end up in all kinds of very bad situations. And so that's something that's very important to know.
Yeah, so could we say that NDEs really are revealing more than they are anything else, shining a light for the person that experiences it, and maybe for all of us through, vicarious learning, like reading the stories in this book?
That's one thing they're really good at. The life review portion of some near-death experiences, of being able to see your life, see the impact you've had on other people, clearly discern when you've been behaving in an unloving way, and see and experience the consequences of those actions. But also we learn a lot from people that have a near-death experience, including a life review, and then come back and begin to live their life as a near-death experiencer with this increased awareness, but don't always take care of the human side of themselves. I'm going to read a quote now from Howard Storm, who was a near-death experiencer, very well-known one that had a hellish experience. And this is what he has to say. He says, one of the things that I think is a huge problem with near-death experiencers, and I include myself in that category, is egotism. I've been turned off by some near-death experiencers because I found that their ego was getting in the way of their truth and their authenticity. Here's one more quote from Kenneth Ring that echoes that. As always, discrimination and discernment must be exercised, because even in the near-death world, there are persons, including some near-death experiencers, who are not always what they seem, or who suffer from obvious self-inflation or other grandiose tendencies that any prudent person would do well to eschew immediately. Please remember something that should be obvious. Near-death experiencers, though they may have seen the light, are still human and have human failings. Not they, but only the light should be exalted.
Wow.
So do not let your enthusiasm for these teachings and for what the light represents blind you to possible excesses in its name. So you're asking me again what some of the things were that I had learned from these experiences, and that's another huge thing, how important it is to work on the human developmental side of ourselves. And spiritual experiences, even epic miraculous healing, near-death experiences do not do away with the need to still work on the human side of our beings.
We're still human. We still have work to do. If we're back, we had the NDE, so obviously we're back. That must mean that for this life, for this incarnation, there's more work to do. And
there's still work to do.
And
right.
and the NDEs don't take human choice and free will away from us, obviously. We still then get to choose, okay, I've had this experience, now what? What am I going to do next?
Right.
Yeah. Wow, this is wonderful stuff. The book is The Purpose of Life as Revealed by Near-Death Experiences from Around the World. David Sunfellow is the author. You can find him, at a lot of different sites online, including the-formula.org, universal-truths, the purposeoflife-nde.com. Why don't you just Google him? Google David Sunfellow. Better yet, get the book, The Purpose of Life. We'll be back with more David Sunfellow here on Strategies for Living.
Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly.
Welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living here on 101.7 FM, 710 KIO, marriage and family therapist David McMillan, Rapid Reuben Wright, and David Sunfellow, the author of The Purpose of Life is Revealed by Near-Death Experiences Around the World. You're a busy fellow just maintaining websites, David. Let me mention a couple here. Encounters with Jesus, encounters-with-jesus.org. You're on Twitter. You're on Facebook. People can go to facebook.com and NHNENDE. So you're all over the place. You're just all over the place. Are you?
There's. Go ahead.
Are you continuing to collect stories?
I am carefully. I have a couple of new things I want to include in a future book possibly, but got my hand on the pulse most of the time, watching for new stories that might be able to illustrate the truth more clearly than I've already been able to do with the stories I've collected. So, yeah.
A couple of the things as we are closing, don't give up, don't lose hope. That comes through. Always remember you're never alone, and you matter. No matter what you think, you matter. You're unique, you're essential, you're irreplaceable. Wow. David, thank you for doing this work. Thank you for coming and sharing with us, obviously, but more important, thank you for doing the work you're doing, because I know you're touching a lot of people that otherwise might not be touched in a church or touched here or there. And, man, you're doing it. So thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
And I hope you will come back. I hope you won't be a stranger now that you're a life strategist. Reuben has awarded you your official stripes as a life strategist.
Hey.
That's right. You'll get your badge in the mail.
Your badge will come in the mail.
Thank you.
And so that means you gotta come back. Will you do that?
Okay, I'll be glad to.
All right. In the meantime, folks, go get this book, The Purpose of Life, as revealed by near-death experiences from around the world. David Sunfellow is the author. You will not be unhappy that you've got the purpose of life. I promise you. Reuben?
Yes.
You know what?
What's that?
You've done it again.
David did it, but I most certainly did it again.
Yes, you did. Always, always. Folks, you're the ones that really have done it again because you've tuned into Strategies for Living, and we thank you. And we thank our sponsors, Cypress Grove Behavioral Health System. Gilsole and Associates Attorneys at Law. Jerry Anderson, State Farm Insurance. Learning RX. Cannabis with Love. Don't forget they've moved down the street to 3772 Uri Drive. And the Joint Chiropractic, Shreveport and Bossier City. If today were the last day of your life, you only had one more phone call that you could make, who is it that you'd call? What is it that you'd say? And why are you waiting? Make the call. For David Sunfellow, for Reuben Wright, I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. See you next time on Strategies for Living.